3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
Welcome to Lighthouse Live with Jordan Devitt, the show where we give God the glory from this generation to the next. And now, to your host, Jordan Devitt.
Good morning and welcome back to Lighthouse Live. I'm your host, Jordan Devitt. I'm so happy that you've joined me this wonderful morning. Before I do anything, I just want to thank Pastor Ann, the senior pastor here at the Lighthouse Church of All Nations. I love you and I honor you, and I'm so thankful for what you've done and allowing me to be able to minister through this radio program. I also want to just say thank you to every person who's joining me this morning. I'm so happy that you're here, especially people who are from the Lighthouse. I am so thankful that you support and that you are just encouraging me through this radio program. And so this morning, God placed it on my heart to minister about how everyone is a servant. And here's the thing I want to say. Everyone is a servant to something. But my desire through this program is to show that everyone should be a servant to the Lord. Everyone should serve the Lord. But everyone is a servant inevitably. Now, every person has different things that they're a servant to, but what I want is that our main focus is this, that we can understand how every person is a servant, and we want it to be serving the Lord. You see, in 2 Peter 2:19, I read this. It says, "They promise them freedom while they themselves are slaves of depravity. For people are slaves to whatever has mastered them." I want to read that again. People are slaves to whatever has mastered them. You see, every person on the face of this planet can be a slave to something and is a slave to something. And I'm going to explain that. Now, we want to be servants of Christ, but some people are not servants to Christ, but they're servants to other things. They're slaves to it. I'll explain how. You see, some people, they may say, well, they won't ever admit it. They would never admit that they're a slave to it or that they're a servant to it. But how could someone, I know some people who, they smoke weed and they're smoking constantly. Every 30 minutes they're smoking weed. You're a slave to the weed. People are slaves to the weed. There's people who are slaves to alcohol. They need a drink every hour. Every hour they need a drink. There's people who are slaves to money. They are obsessed. They are obsessed. And I'm going to go into that a little bit later on. But they are obsessed. Now, of course, God wants us to work hard. You could study that all throughout the book of Proverbs. But slaves to it. It's got them by the throat. People are slaves to so many things in this world. And the devil is grabbing them with these things. And I want to encourage us this morning to learn and understand that we've got to have God be the person that we are the only one that that is being served. That God's the only one that's being served. Nobody else but God. And the way that we can do that is living our lives, allowing ourselves never to be mastered by someone, never to be mastered by something, but to only allow Jesus to be the one and true master of our lives. You see, everybody is designed to worship. Everybody. Not one person in the entire world will ever live their life not worshiping something. They won't. That's why I find it so interesting when people can come to church or people can do certain things and they think that it's odd that people worship the Lord. It doesn't make sense to me. Because everyone's designed to worship. And if you don't worship the Lord, your worship's going to go to something else. Because we're designed to worship. I'll explain it to you here in Exodus 32. This is a powerful, powerful story that explains it. It says, when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." Aaron answered them, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they had handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with tool. They said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." And when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." So the next day, the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward, they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. Everybody worships. Everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. You will worship. You will worship. Why? You're designed to worship. You've been designed to worship God. And so when people don't worship God, they're going to worship something else. You see, the moment that Moses left, people forgot about God, and they wanted something to worship because there's a craving for us to worship something. There's a craving built inside of us to worship something. And so when we don't see God, we start to worship. We start to worship. When we don't feel God, people start to worship other things. They start to worship shows. They start to worship music. They start to worship people. They start to worship. It could be anything. They worship. It's built inside of us to worship. And so when we don't worship God, something else is going to take our worship. But I want to encourage you that we worship and that we serve God deeply, and that we don't do the things that the Israelites did when Moses left. People in the world are so consumed by worship, and they don't realize it. They won't admit it, but they worship so many things. And God is the only one who's been designed to be worshiped. He's the only one. Worship is such a beautiful thing, because when you worship, you allow all of those emotions that are inside of you to be released as you come into worship. You allow them to be released. That's why some people will laugh when they go into worship. Some people will cry. Some people will dance. Some people will run. Some people will shout, because it's a release as you worship. And that's why when you see other people in the world, when they get excited, they may worship a sport. They get excited. They're worshiping it. There's a release that happens, that they get so excited, so built up, because they're worshiping it. They're worshiping it. You see, as believers, we've got to get to the place where God is the only one that we're worshiping. That God's the only one we're worshiping. We want that it's God that we serve. Only God. And people have been, they don't realize it, but they've been worshiping so many other things but God. And it's so sad to see. But people have fallen into all these different things, trying to find what their purpose is, but they're worshiping other things than God. And this morning, I want us to break out of the fact that we don't need to worship anything but God. We don't have to. But if we neglect the worship that's been designed for God, then we can easily become worshipers of other things. And I've done it. And many other people have done it. And they've fallen into this. But we have to learn that worship is something that only God needs and that only God should have. And if we don't worship Him, it's going to go somewhere else. It's going to go somewhere else, inevitably. And something else is going to master us. Something else. You see, worship is something that we should never look at people and think of it wrongfully of them. Never. Because how can we think of it wrongfully when someone's worshiping? It's one of the most beautiful things. And I find it so crazy because people don't think it's weird to cry in a movie. People don't think it's weird to laugh in a movie. And is the movie bigger than God or better than God? No. So it is not that we should ever look down upon it, but we should always be excited because it's something so special that God desires for us. In 2 Samuel 6:21 through 23, it says this, David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house when he appointed me ruler over the Lord's people Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But by these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor." And Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. You see, Michal, Saul's daughter, because she looked down upon David, she became barren. She couldn't have any children. There's no reason to look down upon worship. And people who do that, they don't realize that they're actually worshiping themselves. They just worship other things. They worship other gods. And just because you don't go into a temple, just because someone doesn't go into a temple doesn't mean it ain't a God. Because they do the exact things that are considered worship. And I want you all to understand it this morning because so many things are taking God's worship. So many things. So many things are taking what is supposed to be God's. So many things. It's awful. It's awful to see that there's people who are taking the worship it's been designed for God. It's awful to see that there's TV that's supposed to be the worship that's been designed for God. It's awful. That there's things that are so exalted in our world. They're so exalted that it's like the most important thing. That nothing's more important than going and doing these things. And it's like God is getting overlooked. How are we overlooking God? How? How can we overlook God and go and worship other things? It's terrible. I ask you this morning not to overlook God. I encourage you not to worship other things. I encourage you that we would realize in our hearts and in our minds, why do we need these other things to take the worship from God? Why is God not first? Why is God not prioritized? Why is God not number one on our list? Why? Why don't we make a sacrifice when it comes to God? Other things are stealing the worship that's been designed for God in our lives. And if we neglect that, we're going to end up committing idolatry. And we cannot do this. We've got to put God first. Even if it breaks traditional normality. Even if it breaks things that are normal. Well, I was raised in a church where everyone's silent. Or I was raised where I'm silent with everything. Please, this is all I ask you. Yes, it maybe you can be a quiet person, but you can get alone and you could be yourself with God. And maybe that's your form of worship. But all I ask is this, that you would put God number one on your list for the priority in your life to be worshiping him. And that you would be submitting to him more than anything else because there's things that are trying to master our lives. And if we neglect to see that, we're going to be mastered by something that is not God. And we'll be a slave to it, living based on random things that should have no authority over our lives. Nothing. There should be no input from those things. So please, please, do not ever look at someone's worship and look down upon it, because it's important, even if it's not traditional. It's important to God. God he's not concerned about the traditions. He's not. He wants us to be open and be willing to worship. And David probably was breaking traditions as a king in the way that he was worshiping. He had to be. The way that kings were held and the honor they were held in during that time. And I believe that's why Saul's daughter looked at him like that. Like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? But I encourage you not to do that. If people want to worship, if people want to shout and dance, let them. Because it's pleasing to God. It's pleasing to God. And be happy that people are worshiping God. If we could be passionate about anything, let's be passionate about the gospel of Jesus Christ. Let's be passionate about that. Let's look at that as the most important thing. The most important thing. Now, I was reading about the way that God actually looks at money, too, as a master. In Matthew 6:24, and it says this, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." Here again, we could see how God knows that we can actually be a servant of money. We could be a servant of other things rather than God. We can. I find it so interesting this is what I found the most interesting. God doesn't even put the devil in that category. He puts money before the devil. He doesn't even mention the devil in that. Because that's how powerful money is. It is powerful. So powerful. It's people who will be fine with losing their family. People will be fine with losing everything they got just to get an extra dollar. They'll be fine with it. They'll sell themselves. Sell themselves for nothing. Just to get money. Just for money. Because people look at it like a master. They serve it like a master. They'll do anything. The moment money's involved, running. People are moving, doing anything they can. And this is all I ask you this morning, that as believers, I already said it, I know that God understands that, yes, we need money. Yes, we need to be provided for. Yes, we have concerns. We have these things. But this is all I ask. If we can wake up early for money, can we wake up early for our Bible? If we could wake up early for money, can we wake up early for prayer? If we could stay up late to do certain things, can we stay up late for God? Can we? Can we? Because if we can do these things for all the other things in the world, can we do it for God? Can we? Can we stay up late? Can we wake up early? Can we go a long time without food? Because that happens sometimes. Can we make a sacrifice for God and lay it down to God and say, God, you're the only one who's the master of my life. And you're the only one I'm going to serve. And because of that, I'm going to put you first. Because of that, I'm going to exalt you first before anything else, before my day even gets started. I'm going to try my hardest. And I'm going to make the sacrifice to live for God. Because God, you're the only master in my life. I ask you that this morning so sincerely because God has been getting jaded in the way that he's been treated in a sense of putting him first. People in the world have been committing more idolatry than it's been absurd. Idolatry everywhere. Everything else gets the worship except God. And we've got to, as Christians, realize God is the number one in our life. He's the number one. Nothing is more important than God. Nothing. It doesn't matter what it is. So here's all I ask you. This is the one point that I want every person to have from this morning's radio program. Do not commit idolatry. Don't commit idolatry. Be more concerned about the things of God than anything else. What I mean is this, the kingdom is the most important. It's the most important thing in our lives. It's the most important things. Most important. Most important. If we are believers in Jesus Christ and we want to serve him wholeheartedly, because we're not going to be lukewarm, we're going to serve God wholeheartedly. we've got to put the kingdom as the first thing that we're concerned about. The first thing. Everything else will line up, but we've got to put God's kingdom first. We can't be committing idolatry. We can't be letting anything just take our time. We can't be. We've got to put him in the position where he's supposed to be. We've gotta. We cannot keep living our lives making everything else more important. I find it so wild. I find this so wild, and this isn't any of us. I know this ain't any of us. But I find it so wild that someone can say, oh, I follow this religion or whatever it may be. And then I ask them, well, how often are you involved in anything? And they may say, well, two times a year. How dishonoring is it that's, imagine God seeing someone say, 2 times a year is what you give me. 2 times a year. Let me say something. We are not that important. We're not that important. That only 2 times a year we can give time to God. We're not. And trust me, I know that's not any of us, but I want you to understand that. We're letting things that don't matter take up time. We're putting things before God, serving other things. And we've got to put God back in the position where he's the first one that gets our praise, our glory, our honor, our everything. Our everything. He's the first one. And if we neglect to do that, we could slip into idolatry, and I don't want us to ever be in that position. Please, believers, I ask you so sincerely this morning, and I feel a deep burden in my heart that we've got to stop putting things before God and letting God take the back seat of things in our life and letting God take everything, letting him be the last thing on our plate. Please, this morning, let God be number one. I read in Jonah 2 in verse 8, it says this: those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them. There's so many people who are turning away from such a precious love. They don't even realize what they could have because they're taking worthless things that don't even matter. They don't even matter. And they're putting it before God. They're making it more important than God. And I ask you this morning, would you make God the most important thing on your agenda? Would you make God the most important person in your life? Would you? Would you? Would you take time to put God in your plan? Would you take time to put God in every single area of your life? Because there's so many people who are living as servants, living as worshipers to every other thing in the world except God. And we've got to put God first. We've got to put him back in the position where he is first. Because when we do that, I'm telling you, your life will never be the same again. You will see such a beautiful, beautiful blessing, a beautiful relationship that's so everlasting, so perfect, so peaceful, so amazing. But we've got to put God first. And so do not let anything be the master in your life except Jesus Christ. And let's just pray. Father, I pray that you would just allow us to never let anything be more important than you. Lord, let our lives be uplifting you in every area, God, that nothing, God, is more important than worshiping you. Nothing's more important than giving you praise. Nothing's more important than exalting your holy, precious name. God, that we would honor you, Lord, that we wouldn't be dishonorable and think that our time is so important, that we're so important, that nothing else is more important than us, Lord. Let us not be selfish, God, but let us put you first, God, in everything that we do, in the kingdom first, in everything that we do. In Jesus' mighty name, I thank you, Lord. Amen. Well, I'm so happy that you joined me this morning. It's so amazing what God is doing and what he's revealing to us through this program. And I just pray that each and every one of you would be able to learn through this and that you would be able to understand more concepts of how you can live a life as a believer in dominion and in the power that God's called for you. And so please stay engaged, share these broadcasts, allow people to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ, because I know something that God is doing something so special here in Chicago that you will be able to have your life changed as you understand the gospel and the depths of what God has for you in the way that he wants it to be delivered to you. And so stay connected, stay engaged, be able to know and see what God has for you, because his plans, I promise you, are so great, and he has a blessing in store for you. And so I'm so happy that you joined me this morning. Have a wonderful, wonderful Sunday. God bless you all. Take care.
Get your new book from Pastor Dan Willis, The Multicultural Church, Embracing Unity and Restoration. For over 40 years, Pastor Dan Willis has led a growing multicultural church community in the suburbs of Chicago. His insight, wisdom, and overall love for people are sure to bless and empower your ministry. Order your copy of The Multicultural Church, Embracing Unity and Restoration today. Log on to www.danwillis.org today and take your ministry to the next level.